So Guido, as you know, this is a group composed by, business and thought leaders of many of Brazil's leading companies and institutions. And most of them are at the C-level or on boards of directors. And under this leadership program, we are debating critical issues every month based on a book that is selected to serve as the framework for the discussions. And on top of that, we have special sessions with leading thinkers like yourself, who are our guides, to think better about these subjects and, of course, to act accordingly. And Guido, you don't need introductions, right? But for the sake of starting this event in a more formal way, I would like to highlight to all participants that Professor Palazzo is a full professor of business ethics at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland. He studied business administration and has a PhD in philosophy from the University of Marburg in Germany. And in his research, Professor Palazzo is passionate about, in his words, the dark side of the force. And he investigates, the critical issue of why do good people in organizations engage in morally inappropriate, toxic, criminal, and even violent behavior. Wow. And he's well known also for an amazing course on Coursera that I actually attended years ago, and it was fantastic, named Unethical Decision Making in Organizations. And Professor Palazzo is also widely known for his studies about globalization, in particular on human rights violations in global supply chains. And he has a great TED Talk on responsible consumption and the soft power of storytelling. So without further ado, Guido, I'm going to kick off this conversation with 5 or 6 questions, and then open for other questions from the members of our group, whom I also greet and thank a lot for being here. So Guido, I'd like to start off with your upcoming and much awaited book that, as far as I could understand, is going to be titled Inferno, la stessa parola in portoghese, Inferno, Unlocking the Secrets of Ethical Failure in Organizations. So could you please share with us the main ideas of your book, the scandals that you analyzed, and most importantly, when is it going to be released?
Yes, because you could read this as one of your next books, right, in your group. Now, this book is a project that somehow emerged around this Coursera course that you mentioned. So this course on unethical behavior, this research on why good people do bad things in organizations. So I analyzed over the last years all the big scandals that happened, I would say, the last 2 decades, from Dieselgate, Volkswagen, to Wells Fargo, to the Boeing crashes, to doping in professional cycling. So many scandals. And I was curious about whether or not there would be a pattern, because on the surface, all these scandals are very different. Theranos, it's a fraud of a startup. Doping is illegal enhancement drugs. So it's always different things. But is there maybe something behind or under the surface that is similar? So that was the idea of my research, and together with my colleague Ulrich Hofrage, who also does the Coursera course with me, we think we found a pattern. So things that happen again and again, and if you know that pattern, you might use it as a kind of early warning signals. We called this book project at the beginning Inferno, because we find 9 elements that drive scandals, and 9 is also the number of circles in hell for Dante in his famous book Divine Comedy. And that's why, and for employees, very often these contexts of these companies who have a scandal are contexts of tremendous suffering, and therefore we thought about calling this Inferno as a hell, because it's a hell for many people what's going on in these companies and for stakeholders. And because it has also 9 circles. But our book agent already told us that we have to change that title, because if we want to sell it to American managers, they don't know what Dante is, and it would turn the book into a niche product. So we have moved on from that title, sadly, but we now call it the dark pattern, because that is what we find. It's a dark pattern of things that happen again and again in companies, but not only companies, also NGOs, humanitarian organizations, military organizations, sport organizations, hospitals. So it's everywhere. So that's in a nutshell the idea. And yeah, the book, we are trying right now to find the publisher, which is the role of the agent who does this in New York right now, but it's difficult to say. I hope in a year from now that we can release the book.
Oh, wow. And maybe for the, at least in Portuguese, you could keep the original title, you know, because Inferno, very strong. And as you mentioned, is actually what unfortunately is going on in many organizations and for people who live this kind of realities, right? And Guido, nowadays we are witnessing in Brazil another huge corporate scandal, you know, and another one. So this time it is happening with a Brazilian retailer chain called it Americanas. And the name Americanas, it's because it was founded by North Americans 80 years ago. It's a very big company, around 50,000 employees, 50 million customers, and about, you know, almost 4,000 stores, and very traditional. And the interesting thing, Guido, is that since 1982, so about 40 years ago, this company has been controlled by the three founders of 3G Capital. You know, this private equity fund, which is one of the main shareholders of AB InBev, Kraft Heinz, Burger King, and other well-known companies. And what happened is that these companies, they announced that a new CEO from outside would take over in January this year, 2023. And just a week after taking office, this new CEO resigned, claiming that the company, you know, had simply hidden debts of about $5 billion over several years. And just to have an idea, this is about half of its total assets. And as you know, of course, 3G Capital management philosophy has been a kind of a poster child of the focus on shareholder value. And just for example, among Americana's core values, it is written in the website, is being obsessed with results. So my question is, to what extent, you know, management cultures based on chronic stress, cutthroat competition, both inside and outside the company, and this sort of laser focus on shareholder value have been predictors of this major unethical and even illegal conduct?
Well, first of all, I think to be obsessed with something is already a red flag, right? I mean, Amazon uses a similar formulation. They are obsessed with customers. And obsession, if you look at this from a clinical psychological perspective, is nothing good, because it means that you are so absorbed by one thing that you are no longer able to see anything else. And if you're totally absorbed by maximizing profit, well, then you do not see any other stakeholders, you do not see any other risks, you just focus on that one thing, and you do it at any price. And sometimes this ends in fraudulent behavior. So this neoliberal ideology, how I would call it, is one of my nine elements of my pattern. So this idea that markets regulate themselves and companies have the only moral responsibility to maximize profits, that's how Milton Friedman called it, that leads to a very narrow perspective of what is my role as a leader in an organization. And I do whatever it takes to achieve that goal, because that's how my success is measured, how my bonus is paid. And you see this in scandals like the Boeing crash. Boeing was, so maybe as an intro, the Boeing scandal is about these two 737 MAX airplanes that crashed. So a brand newly constructed airplane that was built in a way that the pilots were exposed to risks they could not master, and that's why they crashed. Now, this company was famous for being a great engineering company until they hired a CEO coming from General Electrics. He was working in the team of Jack Welch, who is the inventor, in a way, of this shareholder value practice. And this CEO came and turned around the culture in the company. So everything was now around shareholder value. That means you do two things, basically. The first thing you do is you brutally cut costs, because you have to be efficient. And the second thing you do, and a lot of companies do that, you buy back your own shares. Because if you buy back your own shares, so you invest your own profit not in innovation, you invest it in buying your own shares because that increases the shareholder value. Sometimes there are legitimate reasons to do this, but in most of the cases, it's just that it's increasing artificially the stock value because there are simply fewer stocks and therefore the value goes up. And what goes up as well is your bonus as a CEO. So for the shareholder and the CEO, it's a win-win situation. But what it does with the company is it undermines the long-term success because you don't invest anymore. So Boeing was giving their engineers 2 KPIs to build this airplane as cheap and as fast as possible. So it was no longer about safety, great engineering, innovation. It was about cheap and fast. And that's what they did. They built a cheap and fast airplane and it crashed. So I think this shareholder value ideology, and it's not that by intention they wanted to produce a bad product, but that happens if you are obsessed with shareholder value. And if I'm obsessed with customers, like at Amazon, I treat my own people very badly. I don't care about the environment because it's just customers. So in a nutshell, I think if a company is too much focused on shareholder value maximization, at one point, if the story doesn't work anymore, you are in trouble. You don't increase the share value anymore. You don't have success. But you have to tell your owners that your story is still growing and growing and growing, like the Enron case. So you do anything to grow the value of your share by doing illegal things. So maybe something like that also happened in the case that you just mentioned.
Wow, fantastic, Guido. And since you mentioned the example of Boeing, which has kind of suffered a shift in the mindset as a result of an executive that was originally from GE and which ran for as a successor, to be a successor of Jack Welch, but was not picked for the position. There is, of course, this book, The Man Who Destroyed Capitalism.
Yes.
I don't know if he was the single, culprit, but for sure he spreaded this kind of what the author claims it's the Welchism. It's a mindset based on downsizing, deal making, financialization, and this has spread it out in the business world because, of course, this was the reference for a generation, right?
We celebrate the wrong people, right? We celebrate the wrong leaders with the wrong mindset. I mean, there's this famous story about Jack Welch when he became CEO at GE. He gathered the top 500 managers of the company in a big room, and he told them, look to the left, look to the right. You won't see these people anymore in the future. And then he fired most of them. So this disregard for human dignity that you find in such cases, we have celebrated that in the past because it created more shareholder value. But interestingly, you could see when he left GE, the company almost collapsed because the system he had designed was not designed for long-term success. It was designed to maximize in the short run and thereby maximizing his own bonus.
Yes.
See, Angela, that's your end up.
Yes, and just to complement Guido, I'm reading a book. It's called Power Failure about GE. Mm-hmm. And one interesting thing is that the author had an interview with Jack Welch when he was already very old. He was, in his late 70s. And one thing that called his attention is that after the interview, Jack Welch offered a ride to this author. And during this ride, there was a 2-lane traffic, and he simply drove in the middle of the road, so the other cars had to move out of his way, and he had a complete disregard for the others. So I don't know, the connection between the behaviors and the private life and the public, let's say, role as a business leader. Of course, there is this complement of the two things. Just because it remembered me of the personality of the people that we are celebrating. So, Angela, yes. Please.
Well, Professor Guido, it's an honor to have you here again. Thank you so much. I have 2 questions. My first one is, how can we deal with psychopaths in top management positions. Because, for instance, our primate cousins, like the chimpanzees and the bonobos, they ostracize the ones that not working in the benefits of the group, the bullies and etc. They ostracize them. But in our Western civilization, we reward this type of behavior with power, with prestige, with belonging, as we can see in the examples here that you mentioned, the Jack Welch from GE, the Richard Sackler from Purdue that caused the opioid epidemic. And I suggest for everyone here to see the Netflix series, Painkiller. And for instance, of course, the 3G Capital founders, one of them, he has a book and telling proudly how they bullied and established so much pressure on their people for financial results. And we saw the result of that. So how can we deal with psychopaths in top management positions? And what is the role of the board for ethical decision making in a system that reward just maximization of shareholder value? How can we get out of this vicious cycle? This is the first one.
I would invite everybody here in the room after this session to Google the word success and then look at the pictures that come up. And the pictures that come up when you Google success is normally a white man standing on the top of a mountain, raising his hands, celebrating, alone. So we celebrate the ones who believe success is me moving up to the top of the hill. And it resonates with what Alexandre said about Jack Welch. So this disregard for others. We celebrate these people. We celebrate Elon Musk. We celebrate Mark Zuckerberg. We celebrate all these Jeff Bezos. And they are, and I'm not saying they're clinically psychopaths because I cannot tell from the distance. And I'm not a clinical psychiatrist, but behavioral psychopathy is the same as clinical as a result of the suffering that you create.
Yeah.
And these rude leaders who do not care about others, we push them up to the top of companies. And there are many reasons for that. And one of the reasons is this ideological context in which we are that celebrates the lonely individual winner. Life is a competition. That's what we teach. In this competition, someone wins, someone loses. And everyone wants to be the winner. And winning means you use your elbows to push the others down as you go up. And in the short run, that's the tricky thing. In the short run, a psychopath can be super successful. In the short run, the stock value of Boeing did explode. In the short run, GE became a very, very big and successful company. The problems occur later when the damage finally leads to the collapse and the erosion of the culture of the organization. That never happens from one day to the other. It's a slow process. Think about the Volkswagen scandal. It happened recently, but the beginning is the CEO who in the 1990s took over, Ferdinand Piëch, who was a psychopath. And again, a behavioral psychopath. And if you read about him, you find horrible stories how he treated his fellow human beings. That's how the culture started to erode. The others who followed just did what he did. They imitated. And the imitation is probably also something that reinforces that. We learn that if you want to move up, you have to be ruthless, you have to use your elbows, you have to kill others symbolically so that you are the winner. The CEO of Lehman Brothers literally used that term. He said to his traders, you must kill the enemy. And the enemy was not Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan. The enemy was the trader next door. So you create this brutal competition, and then the psychopaths win because they're good in that. It doesn't mean they are better managers because we know they're focused on themselves. And maybe then they know that if they focus on shareholders, then they themselves gain the most, but they are not able to have a broader perspective. They're not able to see stakeholders. They're not able to feel empathy for the suffering of the people in their team. But again, in the short run, they win. What we probably need to do is we need to ask ourselves, how do we select people? How do we promote people? How do we reward leaders? Because that is a system that reinforces certain practices. And we in the business schools, we have to ask ourselves, how do we celebrate or promote certain character traits? We teach charisma. But charisma is something these narcissists are very good at. If the leader is boring, we don't want them. But the boring leader might be the good one for the long-term success of the company, not the charismatic one. So we really have to find out how we better select and promote people that move up to the top. And we have, and that's also important, we have to stop them early on. And that is something companies rarely do. That's maybe a question for all the people in the room. Would you take one of your best managers, seemingly best managers, who has the best business results, but leads like a terrorist? Would you kick him out? I say him because mainly it's men. Most companies would not kick them out. They would say, yeah, but he's successful and he's a bit rough. So they would rationalize it somehow, but they would not kick him out. To the others, that means this kind of behavior is the rule here. It's not just tolerated. That's how you should behave if you want to move up. And that's super dangerous.
Angela,
the second question is, in your research, writing your book, did you identify when people did stop to rationalize and start to accept their own responsibility in their wrongdoings, or there's always a rationalization to feel good about yourself?
Most of the time, when people start to engage in immoral or illegal activities, they feel that what they do is not right. You take drugs as a professional cyclist, you feel it's not right. You are a salesperson at Wells Fargo, you start to commit fraud, you feel it's not right. But then there is this effect that has been described once by an Enron trader. So Enron, this energy company that was one of the biggest scandals in the early 2000s. He said when he was arrested, you do it once, committing fraud on your customers, it smells. You do it again, it smells less. So what happens over time, and I call this the slippery slope, and that's another one of the 9 elements. Slippery slope means that if you move in small steps towards illegality, you don't see it because it happens in so small steps, and each small step is somehow justifiable. You can rationalize it. It's just a little bit more. And then when you end up on the criminal side of this gray zone between right and wrong, you have lost the ability to see it. This is what I call ethical blindness. You do the wrong thing, you don't see it anymore. So, and these people very often, it's very typical, when they get arrested, they wake up, or when they get fired, they wake up and they're shocked by themselves, and they ask themselves, how could I do this? This is not who I am, who I feel inside I am, but I still did it, and I don't understand why. So this slow transformation of the personality is something that drives good people to do bad things. And the cure of that is we have to be mindful about our values. I always ask my students when I teach classes on ethics, what are your 3 main values? Most of the time, they don't know because they never thought about this. Or managers, they don't think about this. What are my main values, and what is it that I wouldn't do? What's my limit of how far would I go because of these values? Because if you don't think about this consciously, when the situation comes, you will not see it. It will just happen. You will do like the others do. You will slip into a routine that is toxic, and you don't feel it anymore. And again, it always starts small. Think about sexual harassment, a topic that is very big now with the Me Too movement. It typically starts with a joke. And when the joke is made and everyone in the room laughs, that means this becomes acceptable behavior, and it shifts what is normal in the organization. So the typical thing is that you do the wrong thing, slowly over time you transform as a manager, and the others around you do the same. Wells Fargo, 100,000 people committed fraud, 100,000. So if everyone around me moves like me to the dark side slowly, everything is normal, because normal is for me what I do compared to my context. If my context moves and I move, I see no movement. I see still stand normality. So the normality shifts towards the dark side, and then I'm shocked when I get arrested. Being mindful, knowing my values, knowing my limits, being prepared to have my sentences ready when someone wants a bribe. What do I say in that moment? That's so important.
Wow. And please, folks, raise your hands to ask questions. Otherwise, I'll keep asking questions for the whole day here for Guido, because I would have many, many questions. But Guido, as you brilliantly point out in your course, Unethical Decision Making, the more one person is measured by a specific number or by a set of numbers, he or she delivers, the more likely he or she will be to fall into a sort of you call this a tunnel vision, right? And in addition, because this is the idea that the end starts to justify the means. And this is not so conscious sometimes. So we had recently a great conversation with Professor Jerry Miller, who is the author of a book titled The Tyranny of Metrics. And in his book, he shows many examples in which what he calls a metric fixation, which is likely to lead to ethical blindness in many different fields, medicine, education, policy, academia. So my question is, do you see a link between our current obsession with indicators, with KPIs, as a kind of a sort of a panacea for running organizations, and the emergence of corporate scandals?
Incentives is another element of my pattern for scandals, and incentives, especially in combination with performance evaluation. So if you give people incentives to achieve a very narrow goal, like at Wells Fargo, you must achieve this quota of sales per day, and if you don't achieve that, something terrible happens. But if you achieve it, you get your bonus. You must build this airplane cheap and fast. You must build this diesel filter at Volkswagen within 2 years, but you can't. So it's a very narrow path which you push people, and then you do what Jack Welch did with people at GE. You put them on a Gaussian curve. So you differentiate them into high, middle, and low performers. And you force your managers to do this with their teams. And then you fire the low performers. So they fired 10, 20% of their people every year. At Enron, they did this exercise twice per year. What does this do with us? And you see what Wells Fargo, what they did. They put a ranking on the wall every day for their salespeople. Best salesperson yesterday, second, and the lowest, the loser of the team. What this does is, first of all, it creates that tunnel vision. I must achieve these goals. And second, it creates this internal Darwinist culture where people think I can only succeed if you lose. I can only survive if someone else is dying, symbolic, is kicked out, is not succeeding. So we cannot succeed together as a team because there's no team evaluation. It's me against the others. And it's another example of this highly individualized narrative of neoliberalism. It's all about individuals. And life is competition, is fighting. You bring this inside the company, you destroy the culture. People will do what it takes to survive. And that includes very often, when the pressure is high enough, breaking the rules.
Wow. And this scarcity mindset, it's interesting because, there are some studies about poverty. And one of the conclusions is that when you are in poverty, you develop this scarcity mindset. And there is no future, there's no us, only short term, only me. And so you make decisions that are bad for yourself as well, yes, not only for others. So I think this kind of scarcity mindset is widespread, right? There is not enough for everyone. Your success will diminish, reduce my success. So, let me hand over here to Gustavo, please, and then Lucas, and then I try to make another question if I can. Hi, Gustavo.
Hi, thanks, Alexandre. My connection is not working very well, so hope you guys can hear me. If not, I will stop it. But Professor Guido, maybe a question to you is, we know that GE under Jack Welch's leadership, right, at some point, early 2000 was, the most valued company in the world, was praised as the best company in the world. But since he left, the company is going to down roads, and it's definitely not what was in the past. But I think that perception around Jack Welch and GE is still pretty strong. Although the results are no longer there, the financial result, I think there is a perception that, oh yeah, this is a GE or a former GE. And it still, to me, still seems that, the markets or the corporate world say, oh yeah, oh yes, oh, Jack Welch. So maybe interesting to see your view. So results are no longer there, but the reputation is still there. What maybe in your mind keeps driving and feeding?
Yeah, it's cutting, Gustavo, but I think
that same thought. Thank you.
Yes, I think Alexandre showed this book on Jack Welch. I read it too, and there are a few other books that came out now on him. So I guess the reason is that we just now start to deconstruct the myth of Jack Welch. It hasn't been done before. And it took some time because he represents the ideology of free market neoliberal thinking. If you challenge Jack Welch, you challenge the entire narrative, and people are not willing to do so. What we have seen with Jack Welch, and the reason why GE is in the situation they're in right now, he turned this company into a bank. He made it an actor on financial markets. He sucked all the money into that and not into innovation. And the best people leave if you treat them without dignity, right? So this climate of fear, of pressure, where you push them constantly to save costs, that kills innovation. If you're not innovative, if you have no money left anymore because the financial crisis was not good for banks and you were a bank suddenly, then you drown in all these mistakes. And that's the moment where people start to ask, well, maybe the way we design financial markets with all that deregulation was not good. And people representing that kind of thinking might not have been the best managers we could have had. So I see this as emerging as a discussion right now. But it's continuing. He will be dismantled as a myth. That's for sure. Because the whole shareholder value thinking is going to die.
And by the way, Guido, when I was in my early 20s, I read another book about Jack Welch, which was Jack Welch, the Executive of the Century. And at that point, I said, look, this is the reference, this is the kind. So maybe we could talk about the role of executive education on all of this, right? In these myths. So Lucas, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Palazzo, for being with us. I have a couple of questions that are related to first method. So I'd like you to talk about a little bit about the method that you used to pin down those patterns, and how do how did you come up with this short list of the 9 patterns? A related question is there a pattern that is more fundamental or more critical than others? Is there some sort of hierarchy among those patterns? For example, if you could talk a little bit, about the importance of the narrative, or the way that we can justify to yourself what you're doing, or time pressure. What do you think could be more critical than others, or there's no such hierarchy? Thank you.
As for the method, what I did over the last years is I digged into all the valuable documents on each scandal. And in most of these cases, you have, for instance, a lot of court documents. Just for the France Telecom suicide scandal, that is one of my cases, I had 1,000 pages of court documents, very detailed about victims, about behavior of managers, and so on. I use these kind of documents. I use books written by investigative journalists. I use or people's voices from inside these organizations that I find in articles, and I compile the basic narrative. So in the end, I always have 30, 40 pages of storytelling, and then I put them next to each other, and I ask myself, is there something that I see in this case that also appears in the other case? So it's a qualitative research method. And then I share these cases with people who were inside these companies. And I ask them, is this a correct and realistic description of what happened in your company? So I had 2 Boeing managers reading my story. I had, for the doping scandal at Tour de France, I had one of the top professional cyclists from the time of Lance Armstrong reading the case. I had a former manager of Wells Fargo reading my case. And when the reaction is, yes, that is what happened, then I can use that story for my interpretation. So this is my process. I compile the story with available data, as many original voices in the story as possible, so original statements from people. I structure that, I give that to people inside, I ask them whether this happened, and then I interpret the cases. That's for the method. Is there a hierarchy? I think there are 2 major drivers among the 9. One is ideology, so neoliberal thinking, because this is such an unconscious and so powerful driver. We are all embedded in this neoliberal market thinking. Markets, they regulate themselves. Humans are egoistic, they compete. Consumption makes us happy. Governments are bad, and we don't need them because markets do it on their own. So these kind of elements that release managers from thinking broader about their role and their responsibility. That's one element. And the second, very clearly, is toxic CEOs, toxic leaders from the top, because they design the system in which all the other elements then appear and get reinforced. If you have a toxic leader, that's for me the biggest predictor of a scandal. Because what they do is they create fear. And in a climate of fear, everything is okay as long as you're successful. But what happens if there is a problem? If your success story is stuck, if you cannot find a solution for a problem, you know that in that moment you cannot go to the CEO because you would be kicked out, you would be punished, humiliated, yelled at. That's not an option. You find a solution to get the story, keep the story going. So you fake the diesel filter, or you build this airplane with a improvised software solution because the airplane had a hardware problem, etc., etc. You find these solutions because you know you cannot mention the problem to the leader. So toxic leadership and ideology are for me the key forces that drive the scandals.
Angela.
Yeah, it's a quick one. So despite of these results that are unsustainable of these companies and the psychopathic behavior, what is the role of the board in those cases that we saw? Because do they think it's not their problem? Do the board members are blind, or do they are enchanted by the psychopath behavior? What is the role of the board? Because it seems it's out of the sight, right?
Yes. And if I may complement Angela's question, because I think this is a very important point, Guido, because we have a lot of board members here. There is the other side of the coin. Last year, we talked with Bob Chapman from Barry Miller, which developed a kind of humanized culture. And what he told us was shocking. He said, look, everything that I did because of myself. My board helped zero to all of this because it's a different language. The language of humans, of culture and ethics. It's not the language of the board. Their language is about numbers, about indicators. So just to complement the other side of the coin here.
What drives these scandals is very often soft cultural things, like leadership style, like the language used in a company. Is it an aggressive language? Is it a more embracing language? It's the speak-up culture. So it's all the things that are invisible to boards because boards don't ask about it. Boards have no means to let this enter into their discussions. Very few boards have even committees on compliance and ethics, where at least one board member would keep the contact with this topic inside the organization. They don't see it, and they don't want to see it very often. Whenever I work with boards, I find this a bit disenchanting, I must admit, because boards mainly care about one thing. Am I, as a board member, personally responsible for these things? Do I get in trouble if that happens? In most countries, the answer is no, you won't. And then the reaction is, so why would I care? Why would I care? Who of Volkswagen's board was punished? Nobody. Boeing's board? Nobody. So these people get away with it. Lehman Brothers, no one from the board was punished. Theranos, Uber, WeWork, you can mention all of them. None of the board members was held legally responsible for the problems that were created. And so in a way, I understand that board members say, so why would I care? They should care, because if they're interested in the long-term success of an organization, these scandals can destroy that success very quickly. I mean, Volkswagen had a damage of $40 billion, Wells Fargo $50 billion, and Boeing $60 billion. So it is costly for the organization to destroy corporate cultures. But as long as board members, one, have no channel into these topics from where they are, and two, don't care because they're not held responsible individually, I'm skeptical about boards' engagement with ethics.
Wow, thank you, Guido. Leila, please.
Yes, thank you, Professor. It's very interesting to hear you. My question is, can you see any positive movement in any area of the economy or in the board, in the executive, in the human resource areas to change this selection process of executives that you mentioned? There were things get stronger and stronger with this executive. Do you see any positive movement that we can learn from?
Mm-hmm. What I see happening in companies that have big scandals very often is that when they clean up, so the phase after the fall, that they very often do three things together. You can see this at Volkswagen, you can see this at Novartis. They invest energy and money in integrity. They promote diversity, and they try to transform the company towards more sustainability. So these three moves, they're all very well aligned in these companies. It's one big movement towards a very different understanding of what a company is. And that gives me hope that this will spread. And if you think this further, a company that values ethics, that celebrates and promotes diversity, that wants to play an active role in the ecological transformation of our society, they need very different leaders at the top. You cannot be a Jack Welch and do this because you do not even understand what these things mean. They're crap for you. So you need people who are having a very different mindset to lead such organizations into the future. So that gives me hope that in their own interest, given that these topics are forced onto the companies, especially the ecological crisis does that, we will see different leaders coming up.
Wow, yes, hopefully. And
Thanks. We all hope and work for that.
Yes, Noemi, please.
Hi, thank you, Professor. My question is, we are in a very high speed pace for all transformations, technology and everything, but we know that human behavior is not changed so fast. So do you see, can you tell us something about how we can speed up, let's say, this movement from personal and of course professional side to, let's say, speed up this transformation? And I would like to hear you about that.
What I think we need in companies is promoting a shift of mindsets. Because the people at the top of companies, they come from a world in which all the topics we discuss right now have not been important, have not been relevant, were not necessary. So they have never been trained to manage ethics. They've never been trained to direct a company through an ecological transition to promote diversity. They don't know how to do that. They don't understand why this would be important, because that's not the world in which they grew up. So what we need to do is we need to organize the shift of mindset, for instance, by putting the people of a company into trainings in which they together develop the new vocabulary of what this all is about, in which we change the incentives for them to reward the broader mindset, to be a leader that is courageously driving us into a more sustainable future. So this is what we need. We at the business school, we need to change our programs, and we do so already. So we have to stop teaching all this competition stuff of Michael Porter, and we have to teach collaboration. We have to teach how you change organizations into something new, because what you describe is what we see as well. Change is so difficult. Why would I change?
Critical thinking, do you think this is not something that usually organizations incentive, but do you think this would be one of the topics that we need to, let's say, push more in all organizations, of course, education as well, but of course in our professional organizations as well?
We have to push this everywhere, but what we also need is people at the top who take ownership of it. Because if you can push this through training and whatever inside the organization, if the CEO still doesn't care, why would the others care? So you need someone who is enlightened at the top and who makes this his or her own topic. And I see this happening in a lot of companies now. I see this, my neighbors in Lausanne, Nestlé, where the CEO came as someone who was known for efficiency programs, and he is slowly turning into a leading voice in the ecological transition. We need courageous leaders who get on board of this in how they speak and how they decide. And that's probably even more important than the training of people in the new type of thinking.
And perhaps, Guido, you mentioned the need for changing, the way the business schools are run and their syllables and everything. But, Edward Deming, he used it to say that school and work are parts of the same industrial era apparatus. It's kind of a system of management. So perhaps the change should be deeper in the sense that is the way we think about education as well, right? So just to be the complement. So Vicky, please. It's still muted, Vicky. Yeah.
Professor, thank you very much for what you are raising here, but I want to think with you about, when we talk about education of our leaders, we are talking and we are thinking about those leaders, we think about people that are able to absorb, understand, and deal with the possibility of being, of reframing the way they think. But when we talk about psychopaths, we are talking about something very different. And I want to stress a little bit more, because I think we are not being educated to discover those psychopaths. If you look at the programs of universities or wherever we are studying, you don't have anything that helps you to understand better the world of people that are not normal. And for me, the psychopaths are the most dangerous. Because they seduce, nah? You agree with me? They seduce.
Charming.
Yeah, charming. And when you think about boards, and I have colleagues here that are from very important boards, the board is the place where it's easier to seduce, because after seducing the board, you go back to your people and you just give orders and do whatever you want.
Yeah.
How do you think we could help those boards to find out that they have a psychopath under them?
for me, one very simple thing that one can do is just to talk with people who worked with that person. And I'm so surprised very often that this doesn't happen. Or when it happens and the reaction is he's a difficult person, then the board members often say, yeah, but that's what we need, someone who is breaking the rules, innovation, moving forward aggressively. So they rationalize it. And they don't read the warning signals. I had one scandal in my book. It's about a hospital in Sweden, Karolinska. They hired a psychopath surgeon. And the hospital asked for references in the 4 hospitals where he had operated before. And they all received very negative feedbacks. And don't work. We didn't want to work with them. He doesn't listen to others. He's super aggressive. He only sees his own advantage. So everything negative, and they still hired him. The rationalization was, yeah, that's how surgeons are. They must be a bit like this, otherwise, breaking bones of people when you move forward with an operation. That you need to be such personality. You can always rationalize the bad character traits of a leader, but if you speak with people who work under that person, you will easily find out what kind of person that is. But we don't do this normally. We don't ask these questions.
We don't ask questions. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Angela, please.
The last one, I promise. It's the relation between diversity and psychological safety, because you can have diversity in a group, but if you don't have psychological safety, people won't talk about what they think, what they hear, what they're thinking. And when we see diversity on boards, we see the change of the board dynamics too. So it changes its own behavior. And the board also needs the psychological safety themselves, because they're afraid to say, I don't know anything about it. They're afraid to say, well, I didn't understand. We need to have an expert about it. And I think the example that Alexandre brought us about Bob Chapman's board, that they didn't know anything about culture. But we have in our codes, corporate governance codes, that the boards are the guardians of the culture and the values of the companies. So how can we show boards that they need psychological safety themselves to have a good mandate, to have a good work on their hands? And I don't know, what are your thoughts about it?
The first thing that we need to look at is the fact that the members of boards, they often become members of boards after a successful career in organizations. So they have gone through these situations of being a leader who maximizes profit, who doesn't care about ethics because it's not relevant. So all these things that we just discussed, they take this with them as a rucksack when they come and become board members. So they don't see these things. And especially if you have a board full of men, they all think all the same. And then happens what you just said. They will not dare to say, I didn't understand this aspect here. They wouldn't say, well, this presentation of the McKinsey consultant on the strategy, I find it crap, when the others find it great. So it's difficult to resist the group pressure if you are all alike. And that is what diversity can change. You bring in people who will just say, I don't understand this, because they are not fearing the pressure of not being like the others, because they are not like the others anyway. And if they, on the top, represent different perspectives, that will break the consistency of opinions, of thinking. One great example for me is that companies start now to bring experts on boards that are speaking on behalf of nature. So you represent nature, not shareholders in the board. You are the voice of the forest. You are the voice of the river, of the dolphin. And that creates already a totally different dynamic. Having people who take sustainability, diversity, ethics as their topic into the board will force the board to think broader. And that is what we need. We need boards that think broader, because even if you don't care about ethics, to succeed in the future means you will have to manage so many topics that have not been there in the past. Diversity, transformation, ecological transformation, sometimes even poverty around the places where you operate, and you suddenly are pulled into political discussions. So you have to learn to deal with that as a board member.
And Guido, do we have time for a last question, please?
Sure.
For myself now.
And we have to take a picture too.
The picture to register this moment, a special moment for us. So
I'll count until 3. 1, 2, 3. Great. I think.
Okay.
Let me see. Yeah.
Fantastic. So Guido, you are, of course, a professor of business ethics. Ethics basically refers to relationships, not transactions. So particularly long-term relationships and the impact of our actions or omissions. But in the business world, what we have seen is that executive turnover has increased significantly in the past decades. So although there is a lot of variation, of course, but depending on the industry and country, we can roughly say that the average, tenure of CEOs and senior managers, revolves around 4 to 5 years. So my question is it realistic to expect from executives, under great short-term pressure for financial results and with such a short average tenure, to prioritize decisions with longer term and collective benefits? In other words, just to simplify, is high managerial turnover an enemy of business ethics?
It certainly is, because in all these scandals that I've analyzed, the pressure on the CEOs came from expectations outside the company. So you see him? Okay. You must deliver success stories.
No, right now, no.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, better.
Okay. You must deliver success stories. And therefore, if you then do not deliver them anymore, the patience of boards is quickly eroding. The dilemma is that, especially when we think about the ecological crisis, what an honest CEO, let's say a company like Unilever or Nestle or Danone, so the food production companies, an honest CEO of that company would need to say, for the next 5 years, we will have to transform our production into regenerative methods. We will have no profit in these years. So you, dear shareholders, will not see any profit in 5 years. A CEO who would say that would be fired the next day. But the problem is that they must do this sooner or later. They must, in their own interest, turn the production into regeneration, because otherwise they run out of resources. But that is then the problem of the next CEO. So in the short run, you cannot do this. In the long run, that will create tremendous problems. And that is built in the system because of what you just said, this short-term thinking that comes with short-term contracts and with short-term patience of markets.
Wow. And do you know this book, Moral Mazes, by Robert Jacko from the 80s? Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the recipe for success that he mentioned is outrun your mistakes, move out before your mistakes are exposed. So it's about the same kind of thinking, unfortunately.
Yes, exactly. Stuff piles up, and then when it surfaces, you are gone, and you're gone with your bonus, and you don't care anymore.
Yes. So Guido, once again, on behalf of the group, I would like to deeply thank you for your generosity, for of taking your time to be with us. You know that we are, it's always a memorable occasion for us, and we are going to keep inviting you until you give up on us. So hopefully not give up on us.
Never.
But to be a privilege and to hopefully meet you once again at some point in the future. Thank you so much. Grazie mille ancora una volta. È stato un vero
It was my
piacere.
pleasure as usual. Thank you for having me for your discussion and the good questions. See you soon.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Guido. Regards to the team.
Very much.
Thank you everyone for being here.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye-bye. See you.